read this morning from Exodus chapter 16. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. The leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning."
There's something about a finish line or a checkpoint that keeps you focused. Maybe if you're a student or you remember being a student, you remember what it was like waiting to get to the end of your final exams. And then all of a sudden, on the other side of the final exams, you didn't have to worry about studying, at least for a little while. Or maybe it's like when there's that project that's going to get done and you can't wait to get there. I remember, I think it was my first 5K, and I remember seeing the like the checkpoint there, or seeing the end, and it just kind of kept me going at like as fast as I could be going at that point, until I realized it was just the 3-mile marker. And if you know a 5K is 3.1 miles. It was just a turn and then a 0.1 more miles. And it was an awful finish for me. But at least I had that sort of measure to get to that thing, and it kept me focused for a while. For the longest time, Eagles fans had winning the Super Bowl as that finish line. And surely once we win the Super Bowl, we will be good people afterwards. We won't be grumpy, awful fans anymore, right? And I think it actually lasted us about 12 months. For others, might have lasted 12 days. I don't know. We were in a good mood, at least for a little while. There's something about coming to something, or even crossing a threshold into something else, that gets you focused. But so oftentimes, we don't really know exactly what's on the other side of that, whether it's graduating, whether it's that when that child comes, or maybe when you get married, or you're into that new relationship, it becomes a different scenario. We're in a series called Courage, the life of Moses, and we're looking at his life and the calling that God put upon his life, and seeing all the various ways God placed before him and the people of God the need for courage to realize their potential, to step into that next moment, to leave a life of slavery behind and rebuild their sense of self, rebuild a real life. And so last week, we got to talk through the Red Sea moment, the moment where the Israelites left their life of slavery behind, saw the walls of water shoot up around the Red Sea, and walked through on dry land and got to the other side. Now we're on the other side. And if you remember the first verse of the reading, they got to the other side, and what they found Well, it wasn't the promised land. It was, you might have been curious about the name. It was the desert of sin. Well, it's actually just a short name for Sinai in the desert underneath Mount Sinai. They came to a desert. On the other side of sort of the greatest moment like the world will ever see, they get to a place that's dry, and is dirty. There's not food. There's no water. And the rest stops are few and far between. It's a little bit better than the Pennsylvania Turnpike, but or not as good as the Pennsylvania Turnpike, but surely an awful place. And it was described in the Bible. The Bible doesn't typically describe it as a desert. They describe it as the wilderness. And in the wilderness, things were harder, things were more difficult, and they weren't where they were intended to be. They had left their life of slavery, but they weren't yet in the promised land. And there's some clear dynamics that we'll look at. But it's worth noting that the Bible uses the wilderness as a specific place and also a metaphor. It would be not an uncommon thing for the people of God to be driven out of their land into a place of wilderness. Jesus himself left his homeland, left his home, and before his ministry spent 40 days and nights in the wilderness. Saints through the ages have recognized that wilderness can be a specific place, but for so many of us, it becomes a season of life where things are harder than they were before. They're drier than they were before. The things that they had in their life before weren't there. It's an in-between place from where we were to where we're getting. If you're on a sobriety journey, you may have stopped drinking, and so you're leaving that behind you, but you haven't gotten to the place where you're experiencing sobriety, the freedom that comes. It's still hard in the in-between. We go through different kinds of wildernesses in our lives. If you lose your job, you're all of a sudden, there's a disorientation, and you're in between your one job and your next job. When you graduate, all of a sudden you're in a new world and you're learning, and the things that were once easy for you now aren't easy. A new marriage can feel like a wilderness, or when a child comes. All these times of in-between where the comforts we once knew, even if it was slavery, at least we were familiar with it, are now not there. And these new seasons can be really tremendously challenging. And it's important to have wilderness as a metaphor for your life. Henry Cloud, psychologist, will talk about one of the things that will get to you and can defeat you in your life when things are really hard are the 3 Ps. When things are really hard, you will start telling yourself things like, this is permanent, it's always going to be like this. It's pervasive, this one thing is bad in every aspect of my life. And it's personal. Like, God is doing this to me, or these people are doing this specifically to me, and you make everything personal. A wilderness means that all 3 of those things are likely not true. It's very likely not permanent, it's very likely not pervasive, and it's very likely not personal. In fact, if any aspect of it is personal, it's directly related to God's care for you. So we have actually a classic story that I want to walk us through, but I want to set it up with a model, though, just a sort of a model that I think will help us understand how God uses the wilderness in our lives to train us to trust Him to provide for us. So if you look on the screens, by the way, you know they're permanent now? So we don't have to take them up and down. Yes, yes. The Sunday captains are like, yes, this is awesome, right? Because we don't have to put them up and down, and we don't have to buy more TVs after we break them. Anyway, And we will get the words back on this screen as well, but we've got a whole bunch of technology that we're all figuring out. Okay, here's the basic model. At the heart of all things, God wants us to learn that he provides for us. And what you have is sort of a double ellipse. There's like the inner cycle that goes on inside of us, and then there's the outer cycle in which we respond. So follow me up from the center, which God provides. God provides situations where we lack, okay? Where we don't have enough. Maybe we don't have enough friendship, we don't have enough food, we don't have enough water, we don't have enough work, whatever it might be. And so when we acknowledge that we lack, we now have the opportunity to take the next step in our little cycle. We can ask, all right? God provides a situation where we lack. God also provides a situation where we can ask. And if we ask, quite oftentimes he will give us, just leave it on the whole model for now. Leave the slide on the whole model, yeah. Then we have an opportunity where we can work, we can participate in the provision, and then we can rest. Every single one of these things are opportunities where God provides. So I want to walk us through this, and I want to start us out by giving us the opportunity to reflect on the fact that we find ourselves, and the wilderness in particular is helpful for enabling us to see that there are areas, and maybe pervasively or in a particularly difficult moment, where we lack. And this is really articulated well in this story, right? Because you have the Israelites, and God's leading them out of Egypt. It got an awful. Pharaoh was literally killing their babies and doing awful things to oppress the Israelites. So God says, enough, we're taking you out of there. Leads them through the Red Sea, an unbelievable thing. And then they get onto the other side, and all of a sudden, they're in the wilderness, and was there a plan for food and drink? And the Israelites get really quite upset. And we need to give them a pass here. Like if you were in the middle of the wilderness without a plan for food and drink, and you also would get very upset as well. All right? But what we need to understand here is that this didn't surprise God. This wasn't like, oh gosh, God forgot about this. There wasn't like a heavenly council meeting where some angel ran in and said, hey, did you realize that there was a desert on the other side of the Red Sea? Like they're hungry, they're thirsty. And God's like, what? This wasn't in the plans. What? All right, everybody, we got to figure this thing out, all right? Get out the whiteboard. We're going to come up with a plan to get food and drink for the Israelites. No. And in fact, it could have been quite the opposite. God could have put a situation where there's food and drink waiting for them, but he didn't offer that either. He enabled them to get to the place where they realized, that they were insufficient. They didn't have what they needed, and they didn't have what it takes. God could have protected them from that experience, but he wanted to provide that for them. Why? Well, the natural human state is resisting God, rebelling God, and one of the things that we want to know more than anything else is our own self-sufficiency. Because if we can be self-sufficient, then we don't have to owe God anything. We can do whatever we want, and then he owes us a good life. But God allows us to experience some lack. God allows us to experience some brokenness. And he allows us to feel some weakness so that we might know and grow comfortable with the fact that we are insufficient. And it takes some courage to admit it for yourself. You are insufficient for your life. Just sit with that. You are insufficient for the demands of your life. And I know that doesn't sound very, self-help or whatever. It's just true. And just think about it. I don't know, maybe you had a bowl of cereal this morning, 1,000 things went right for you to be able to have that bowl of cereal, okay? So many supply lines worked. They worked, they functioned, they didn't get knocked over by pirates, they didn't get stolen by pirates. God invented cows so you could have milk, and those cows milked. Those cows had enough grass because there was enough rain, there's enough grass, so they could produce milk, and the milking situation worked, and the cartons worked, the distribution worked, and the stores were open, and you had enough time, and you had enough money, and you had enough money and you had a job to have that money. So many things happened right that you even had a kitchen table at some point was purchased with some money, and then a harvest worked so that there was grain or granola or whatever that you got, and then got put in a bag, you got put in a box, you got put in a truck, and that truck got there, and somebody pulled that box off that truck, and then he took his razor blade and he cut the top of your box in half. Have you seen that when you get your box of cereal when they just cut the box? Anyway, even in spite of them mistreating your box of cereal, you got that box of cereal home. You were able to pour it. You woke up this morning breathing. At least 1,000 things went right so you could have your bowl of cereal. Now, I know that there's some folks that are like true farm-to-table people, right? Like we're not going to do all that. And yes, they probably bought their chickens and they had their eggs, and that was great, right? But somebody had to invent the chicken. Somebody had to invent it. You didn't invent the chicken. You didn't come up with the idea of eggs. So many things went right, even in the farm-to-table scenario, and none of us controls the weather. We are insufficient. We are dependent people. The wilderness seasons in our lives will continue to remind us that we are a dependent people. We depend on God for everything. Not only do we depend on God, we depend on other people. We depend on other people who don't look like us. We depend on people who disagree with us. Our money goes to people we disagree with. And we depend on those people. We depend on people that might even be at war with us. We might depend on people who don't like us. We depend on people and we depend on God. We are insufficient people. And God is okay with it. Are you okay with it? It's not a good thing to go through life demanding that life continue to reaffirm the prideful notion that you are this independent person and everything in your life you've earned and you deserve. I mentioned alcoholics before, and as I talk to alcoholics, one of the things they will regularly tell me, and this is somebody who's mature in their sobriety, in the first days, in the first couple of years of sobriety, it's really, really hard. If you know somebody's going through getting over an addiction, those first months, you have to pray for them every day. First year is hard. Second year starts getting a little bit easier. But when somebody gets mature in their sobriety from any kind of addiction, one of the things they will regularly say is that they're grateful for the addiction, because the addiction reminds them of their daily dependence upon God. The addiction was this thing that they used to help them to not have to feel their insufficiency, not have to feel their weakness, not have to feel all the pain in life. But once they were able to trust God with all of that pain and have hope that God was able, that a power greater than themselves can restore them to sanity, they had hope, and they were able to get free. And all of a sudden, they learned to embrace their insufficiency. How about you? Are you able to accept that you're a dependent person? It takes courage, particularly for an American, to accept you're a dependent, you're insufficient. If you can embrace that, God has another gift for you. It's the opportunity to ask. This is the second part of the story. Those who are courageous enough to admit they lack, God gives another gift, the ability to ask. And in the preparation of this message, this this part of the teaching was a huge surprise to me. When we were laying out the series, I remember this is the passage where the Israelites grumble against God. They grumble, they're frustrated, they're bitter. Like, wait a second, you got us through the Red Sea, and now we got this wilderness. There's no promised land, and they're grumbling, and they're complaining. And this was the time where God was going to rebuke them for complaining. And by the way, complaining is bad. It's just telling a lie to yourself. It tells the lie that God's not good enough, God's not strong enough, God doesn't care enough. And that's why stuff like cable news that stirs resentments. Resentments are at the heart of just about every kind of misbehavior. That's why I tend to be hard on things that continue to produce lies in your life. Complaining is a lie. But what's interesting about this situation, they surely lie. They listen, they surely complain and listen to the lies that come out of their complaints. They're like, look, if we only had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, that would have been better. Really? Listen to this. When they remember their time in Egypt, they say, there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. Like, I actually think that you sat around brick kilns working all day and long, and I don't think they had much meat. And then they said, you brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Now, here's the thing. You've seen the Snickers commercials, right? When you're hungry, you are not yourselves. So we need to give these people a pass. When I'm hungry, I'm awful, right? I have all sorts of lies. You can tell me all sorts of lies, and I'll accept them, right? Because I'm hungry, I'm grumpy, like whatever, right? But here's the thing. Complaining is that dangerous. And what I thought was going to happen is the God was going to rebuke them, God was going to be hard on them. And that will happen later on in the story. Because those who are mature should know better. And a mature Christian is rarely a complaining Christian. Mature Christians, if they have an issue with somebody, they go directly to the person. In the Psalms, you'll see the psalmist cry out directly to God. Anyway, that's an aside. But what you have here in this story is the entire nation of Israel totally upset, totally frustrated. And they're going to Moses and Aaron and said, what is wrong with this God? They're entirely upset. And here's what you see God do. He doesn't rebuke them. He doesn't yell at them. He doesn't get upset with them. He just cares for them. He just looks out for them. He says, look, the whole passage, the chapter before, they're at some water, but the water is bad. And so he cleaned up the water for them. And then this situation, they're like, what are we going to eat? He's like, all right, here's some manna. And they're like, what? In the next chapter, they'll be like, what are we going to drink? And then he brings water out of a rock. He takes care of them at every level. Yes, there could have been food and water waiting for them after the Red Sea, but God wants to train them to look to him to provide. And yes, they complained and they grumbled and, they forgot about the Red Sea and they were in this illusion as to what their life used to be like when they were slaves, right? But God was just good and caring towards them. And I hope that helps you in your wilderness. Maybe you're in that wilderness now, or someday you're in a wilderness, or if you know somebody in their wilderness. Sometimes when you're hungry and you're thirsty and things are different than when they used to be, you can just be a brute. And I can be just a brute, and we can just be miserable people, and we can be difficult people to be around. But here you see in this story that God cares for them. Sorry about that. God cares for them in spite of their miserable attitudes. And God will care for you in spite of your miserable attitude as well. There's a lot of people who don't believe in God, but God allows the rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. God simply cares. And he will continue to care. He will continue to provide. He did this with Jesus. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, and God sent the angels to care for them. He will do this for the various things in your life. Now, in these moments, you're going to be tempted to go to other places to meet those needs. And God says, just trust me, and I will provide for him. He wants us to learn that he will provide. Now that leads us to the other side of the model, where God invites us to participate in the process. On the left side, it's just the inner cycle. On the other side, it's the outer cycle. And you can go to that slide where it says, we work. What he's going to do is he's going to call the people of Israel to simply trust him and to go out and get the manna. What he said in the story is like, all right, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be quail that's going to come in the evening, and so go get your protein. And in the morning, this manna-type wafer is going to come up, and it's like some sort of kind of bread. It's got a little bit of the taste of honey in it. On a one-time basis, it's probably pretty good. 40 years of it, it could get kind of old. But I'm sure they found different ways to prepare it. But what he didn't do is he didn't deliver manna to their kitchen table every night. They said, here's the deal. I'm going to put it out there, and it's all going to go away by the time the sun gets hot. So I want you to get up every single morning, and every single person, not like one dude goes out and gets it for his whole family. Every single person has to go out and get their own specific bread. Every single person participates in their own provision. Now, in our day and age, we don't go out and get our specific food. No one's going out and getting the eggs that they're going to necessarily eat, except for farm-to-table people. And I think it's really awesome. That's great, and particularly when you share your eggs with everybody else. So, but generally speaking, we all go out on an everyday basis, and we provide for everybody. Everybody does something to provide for everybody, right? And even if you're a student, you're not moving the needle anything for provide for anybody right now. But eventually, we hope what you learn will provide for the whole. But the basic expectation here is that everybody works, and everybody gets provided for. Everybody has a sense of responsibility. They need to go out and get after what they need to do. In all things, you get to participate in the provision. So where do you lack in life? And this can play out itself in all sorts of areas. If you lack a clear conscience, God will provide a clear conscience for you. He'll provide forgiveness. You need to ask for it. If you need friendship, he will provide friendship, but you're going to need to put yourself out there for it. If you're going to need a new job, you're going to need to actually look for one, and you're not going to have to go do stuff to get it. God allows each of us to have the agency with the things that go on in our lives. Now, this gives us an opportunity to talk about how any one of these four things can get all twisted up, right? Because Americans in particular, and particularly educated Americans, have really messed up relationships with their work. Because like no other really time in history, more and more, particularly people who have spent the money on a college education or whatever, they attach themselves and their identity to their work. There was a Harvard Business Review article on this by a woman named Jana Koretz. And what she does is she works with very influential, high-powered people about their jacked-up relationship to work. And the word she uses is the word enmeshment. That people, particularly those who have well-paying or high influential positions, are very vulnerable to becoming enmeshed with their work regarding their identity. Now, the word enmeshment comes from another sort of sociological term that's connected to codependency and abusive relationships. And basically what she is saying is that quite often Americans are vulnerable to becoming enmeshed into an abusive relationship with their work. And so when you lose your job, you lose your sense of who you are. Retirement is so hard for you because you don't know how to let go of this part of your personality. You are this person because of your work. And you become needy for outcomes in your work. You become needy for that promotion. You become needy for the outward signs of your success, right? You need to have the kind of virtue signals, whether it's car, house, whatever it means, that shows other people that you are successful at your work, right? And this idolatry begins shaping everything. Your work becomes your Pharaoh. On another time, I'll talk about how it's a borderline feudalism, right? As Americans continue to look to work for their significance, right? And continue to work more and more and more and more, never getting what they need, right? And so oftentimes, whenever we feel like a lack, we don't go to God for it, we just go to work, right? But when your relationship to work is messed up, it also messes up your relationship to rest. And that's the last thing that God gives. Remember, God gives work, but he also gives rest. And if you're having a hard time stopping work, that might be a sign that you have a difficulty. Maybe that relationship may be broken. If you have a hard time stopping working at the end of the day, having a hard time stopping in the weekend, having a hard time getting a vacation, and I'm chief sinner of this, right? My life is a long-term recovery, a workaholism recovery, right? I know it well. I know that enmeshment. But when God gives the Israelites the manna in the desert, the other thing he does is he introduces something that they will have been hearing for the first time. Now, he heard about like some sort of Sabbath, like God when he created rest on the seventh day. But like the 10 Commandments haven't come. He just says, look, here's the deal. I'm going to give you enough bread for the week. I'm going to give you enough manna for the week in 6 days, but there's going to be nothing out there on the seventh day. So on the sixth day, what you need to do is you need to go get double the amount, all right? Go get 2 omers, an omer for each person gets an omer, but on the sixth day, you need to go get 2. And here's what you also need to do. It's all going to rot overnight. The maggots are going to come get it because you're only allowed to collect for 1 day at a time. So if you don't want the maggots to get it, you're going to need to cook it. You're going to need to cook that. You're going to have to cook that manna so it can get you through the seventh day. What it means is that the rest that God provides is a discipline. It's a discipline to rest. It's a discipline to stop working. And you need to understand, in an agrarian world, to not work 7 days a week is to think to yourself, I'm going to get 1/7 the harvest. Now, if you get 1/7 the harvest, you might not make it through the winter, right? So it's an unbelievable discipline of trust that God will provide enough. I think this is actually a huge area, a huge opportunity for growth for me, for sort of all Americans, is I have sort of tried to rebuild my relationship to work. I've had to rebuild my understanding of rest. And we're only going to do a 4-week series later this spring on this. But when you talk to mental health clinicians, when they talk about people's depression and anxiety and other sorts of things, one of the things they will almost always say is that there's exhaustion underneath it all. There's an exhaustion underneath it all. There's an inability to stop. There's an inability to rest. Partly because our world doesn't teach us how to do it physically or emotionally. Part of it is we don't understand what it is. My definition for Sabbath rest is enjoying the work that's been done. It's a definition by Tim Keller, another pastor. And what he's doing with that is he reflects on God on the seventh day after working. He stops and says, and on the seventh day, God looked and saw that it was very good. He enjoyed the work that he did. I don't know what it's like for you to stop working. But one of the things that often keeps me from stopping working is I'll say something along the lines like, well, I haven't done enough. Or I didn't have a very good week. I need to keep going, right? And if you're a homeowner, there's always one more project you can be doing. If you're a student, you can always be studying, right? If you're single, you could always be swiping. If you're on social media, you can always be posting. Our world gives you a forever amount of works that you can continue to be doing to pursue whatever that might be. You could always be doing something. How do you know if you've done enough? And in Jesus' day, they were all mixed up. They had a messed up relationship with work and rest as well. And they had all these rules around the Sabbath. They went to Jesus and they said, Jesus, tell us what we need to do. What was the work we need to do for salvation. Like, what do we need to do that God requires? And Jesus says this, the work is this, to believe in the one he has sent. That's it. That was so helpful to me. Because, man, I just want to get after it. I just want to do it. I just want to get God to like me so I can get the outcomes I want, right? It's already been done. If this helps you at the end of Jesus' life, he said, and this is helpful. He said, it is finished. The work's been done. You're not going to do something and all of a sudden get God's attention and going to get his favor. Jesus has done all of that for us already. And he gives that to us by faith. He shares his family place. He shares the table with those who would believe in him. You don't earn God's favor. You learn to enjoy it. So, for you, as you learn to trust God's provision in your life, do you have the courage enough to say you're insufficient and you're dependent? Do you have the courage to ask for what God wants you to do? Do you have the courage to show up? Do you have the courage to stop? I want us to pray a prayer and practice this belief in God's provision together. So if you would, bow your heads with me.